The first major observation from the provider utilization and RVU data is that there is very little variation in the unadjusted national relative value units from year to year. This chart illustrates the effect of calculating the ratio of work to total RVUs for a sample of Medicare utilization for over 70,000 internal medicine physicians using unadjusted national RVU values for 3 different years. The distribution of work to total RVUs from year to year are virtually identical for all internal medicine physicians between the 5th and 95th percentiles. The second major observation from the provider utilization and RVU data is that within each geographic locality, the ratio of work to total RVUs is extremely tightly clustered among physicians in hospital-based specialties. This chart shows the range of work to total RVU ratios for this sample of over 6,000 hospitalists is nearly entirely flat and uniform between the 5th and 95th percentiles. Emergency medicine also demonstrates an extremely flat distribution of work to total RVU ratios for over 34,000 physicians in this sample between the 10th and 95th percentiles. This trend is also evident within diagnostic radiology. The blue data points above indicate the distribution of work to total RVUs for radiologist services performed in facility settings and applying a 26 modifier code. The gray data points below indicate the distribution of work to total RVUs for radiologist services performed in non-facility settings wherein radiology services are billed for globally. Within each of these sites of service, the distributions are again extremely flat between the 10th and 90th percentiles for this sample of over 24,000 diagnostic radiologists. The third major observation from the provider utilization and RVU data is the fairly uniform variation between primary care providers in internal medicine, family medicine, and pediatrics, and their hospitalist counterparts. As shown before, the hospitalist work to total RVU ratios are extremely flat and predictable. This is represented among the tight cluster of hospitalist ratios here at about the 0.7 level along the vertical axis. In the lower half of the distribution, all 3 primary care specialties are demonstrating fairly flat, consistent work to total RVU ratios just below 50% when using unadjusted national RVU weights. A gradual increase in those ratios is evident in the upper half of the distribution that generally tops out at the hospitalist level. Some primary care physicians work predominantly in ambulatory settings. Some are dedicated hospitalists, and some bounce back and forth between both settings. This distribution illustrates the fairly predictable continuum of work to total RVU ratios between ambulatory and hospital settings. The fourth major observation from the provider utilization and RVU data subscription is that most of the variation within specialties occurs between markets. This chart illustrates a comparison of the various geographic practice cost index adjustments for 6 real markets. On the left, the Mississippi Malpractice Cost Index is 60% lower than the national base level. On the right, Alaska has now been assigned a 50% higher cost of living index than the national base level. On the far right, the New York City suburbs have a 110% higher malpractice cost index than the national base level. All of these variations in geographic cost indices affect reimbursement for different specialties in different ways. Here is utilization data for global services performed by diagnostic radiologists in non-facility settings that has been adjusted for the 6 market geographic practice cost indices identified in the previous chart. You can see the effect on work to total RVU ratios. Both Alaska and New York City suburbs receive overall reimbursement that is much higher than the national base rates. However, Alaska in dark blue has much higher work to total RVU ratios because the cost of living index is higher relative to the other cost components. New York City suburbs in orangish red has one of the lower work to total RVU ratios because the practice expense and malpractice expense indices are getting relatively higher weight in that market. In this example, both markets, Alaska and New York City suburbs, receive higher reimbursement than the national base rates, but the work to total RVU ratios manifest themselves differently relative to all three cost index components.